My 4-year-old nephew slapped me and said, "Mommy told me you deserved it. Because you're a brokey." That's what my mom always implied. But on the night I finally stood up for myself, I didn't just expose her darkest secrets. I watched her entire world crumble right before my eyes. And honestly, the bitter taste of revenge was nothing compared to the sickening realization of what I had become. My mom, Gina, truly believed she was the funniest person alive. For years, she chased that stand-up dream at dive bar open mics, calling herself a professional comedian, even though she never got past a 5-minute set. Her whole life revolved around making people laugh, no matter who she had to throw under the bus to get there. My childhood, it was her endless well of material. My 7-year-old bedwetting incident? Hilarious. My first period, when I bled through my pants at school. That was her closing bit for months. But nothing, compared to what she did at my engagement party. Luke and I had been together for 4 amazing years. Finally, we were getting married. The engagement party was at Luke's parents' country club, a big deal. His family, his dad's business partners, everyone important was there. And then Gina showed up, already drunk, draped in a sequin dress like she was about to accept an Oscar. She kept butting into conversations, telling jokes that just weren't landing. People politely smiled, but the awkwardness was thick enough to cut with a knife. Halfway through dinner, Gina clinked her glass. For a speech nobody asked her to give. She started by saying how proud she was that I'd found someone willing to marry me despite everything. Then, she declared she had a funny story about why she never thought this day would come. And then she unleashed it. She told everyone about my mental breakdown when I was 19. Not just mentioned it, no, she performed it. Like a one-woman show. She mimicked my crying, acted out me begging her for help, did an impression of me saying I wanted to die. She recounted finding me with pills, rushing me to the hospital, the 72-hour hold. She even made sound effects of the heart monitor. She actually got down on the floor to show how I'd collapsed. The room was dead silent. Nobody was laughing. Luke's mom had tears in her eyes. His father looked absolutely sick. My future brother-in-law just walked out. But Gina? She kept going. The funniest part, she cackled, was when I told the psychiatrist I felt worthless, and he said, "Well, at least you're self-aware." She laughed at her own joke, alone, while 200 people sat in horrified disbelief. Luke knew nothing about this. I'd planned to tell him, eventually, when the time was right. Not like this. Not as a goddamn comedy routine for his entire family. His grandmother was clutching her pearls. His dad's business partners were exchanging stunned, worried glances. Gina finally noticed the silence. "Tough crowd," she declared, before sitting down, as if she'd killed it. Luke's family left immediately. Half of them haven't spoken to me since. They think I'm unstable, that it runs in the family. After seeing Gina, Luke almost called off the engagement. It took months of intense couples therapy for him to trust me, to understand that it was a one-time crisis, years ago. Gina never apologized. Never. She said I was too sensitive, that comedy comes from truth. The next week, she actually used the engagement party story in her set, talking about how rich people have no sense of humor. She even told me I should be grateful she made me memorable. The wedding was just 3 months away. Gina assumed she'd be giving a speech, already working on material, asking for embarrassing stories about Luke to make it balanced. She even bought a white sequin dress, like a second wedding gown, saying she needed to stand out. I told her she wasn't giving a speech. She just laughed. You can't stop the mother of the bride from talking. That's when I decided. Gina needed a taste of her own medicine. The week before the wedding, I invited all her comedy friends to what she thought was my bachelorette party. She was thrilled, thought I was finally embracing her world. She brought 15 people from her open mic nights, a whole crew of wannabe comedians, each convinced they were funnier than the last. I told them we were doing a roast, but with a twist. We'd roast our parents for all the crazy things they did raising us. Gina loved it. Finally, she beamed. You're developing a sense of humor. She went first, of course. More stories about my childhood, making me sound pathetic. Then, others told genuinely funny stories about their parents. And then it was my turn. I started. Calmly. My mom, I began, got pregnant with me at 17 by her married English teacher, Mr. Randolph. The room went quiet. She blackmailed him for money until his wife found out. He killed himself. I paused, letting that sink in. Gina kept the suicide note. It mentioned her by name. The laughter died completely. The air grew thick with a chilling silence. I kept going. How Gina gave me vodka in my baby bottle to make me sleep through her parties. How she brought men home who would comment on how I was developing. And she told me to be nicer to them because they paid our rent. How she stole my college fund, my grandmother's inheritance, and blew it on comedy classes she failed. I told them about her getting fired from 12 jobs for stealing. About her going to rehab 4 times, only to leave when they wouldn't let her perform at group therapy. About her showing up to my high school drunk, prompting the principal to call child services, and Gina telling the social worker I was lying for attention. The room was utterly, absolutely silent. Gina tried to laugh it off, that fake, forced comedian's laugh, but her voice cracked halfway through, coming out as a choked cough. Her face was paper white under her makeup, a vein pulsing frantically in her neck. Liar, she rasped, but it was weak, desperate. She said I was making things up for attention, exaggerating, but her hands were shaking so hard she had to put down her drink. The other comedians exchanged silent, uncomfortable glances. I knew they were remembering all the times Gina had used my stories for her act. Ted stood up first, not looking at either of us, and just walked out. Lucy stared at Gina, mouth slightly ajar, like watching a slow-motion car crash. Kira, one of Gina's closest friends, had her phone up the entire time, recording everything. The red light was still on. The vindication that surged through me was like electricity, hot, bright, powerful. But underneath it, something cold and sharp spread through my stomach. I had just utterly destroyed my mother in front of everyone she knew, everyone who made up her entire social life. And the look on her face, it was like I'd kicked a dog. Greg, another comedian, cleared his throat. Maybe we should all take a break. Get some air. His voice sounded unnaturally loud in the oppressive quiet. People started moving, an awkward shuffle of scraping chairs and quiet footsteps. Within 2 minutes, the room was empty. Just me and Gina, sitting across from each other at a table littered with empty glasses and wadded napkins. She looked at me with an expression I'd never, ever seen on her face before. Something that looked like genuine fear, not her usual swaggering confidence. Her voice was small. "Old, why would you do this to me?" she whispered. My words came out flat and hard. "You did this to yourself, Mom. When you turned my suicide attempt into a comedy routine at my engagement party, in front of 200 people. Her face crumpled. She started to cry, but it wasn't the dramatic, manipulative crying she usually deployed. This was different. Uglier. Makeup streaking black down her cheeks. She gasped, "You've ruined my reputation in the comedy community. These people are my only friends. You've taken away the one thing that made me feel like I mattered." I stood up, grabbed my jacket. She kept saying my name, begging me to wait, to let her explain. I just walked out. The hallway felt too bright, too quiet. I could still hear her sobbing through the door. I didn't feel as good as I thought I would. Just tired. Mean. Like I'd swallowed something sharp and it was lodged in my throat. Luke called me 3 times that night, but I let it go to voicemail. How was I supposed to explain this? I sat on my couch, watching his name light up my screen, my stomach twisting tighter with each ring. When I finally listened to his messages the next morning, his voice was worried, confused. He said Gina had called him, crying, claiming I'd attacked her in public. The third message said his mom was asking questions, and he didn't know what to tell her. Rage flooded back into my chest. Of course, Gina had already called him. Of course, she was spinning this to make herself the victim. Just like always. She'd probably told him I was cruel, unstable, that I'd humiliated her for no reason, that she was just trying to be a good mother. I threw my phone across the room. It hit the wall hard enough to leave a mark. The next afternoon, I met Luke for coffee near his office. I arrived early, ordered something I didn't drink. He came in looking exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. We sat at a corner table, and before Gina could twist it any further, I told him everything. About inviting her friends, setting up the roast, and laying out every single horrible thing she'd ever done. Luke listened, silent, his coffee getting cold, his face growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Just looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Then he asked, "Do you feel better now that you've heard her back?" The question hit me like a slap. I opened my mouth to say yes, but nothing came out. Because the truth was, I didn't feel better. Not at all. I felt sick and angry and terrified that I was turning into her, becoming someone who hurts people and calls it justice. He told me his parents were asking if we should postpone the wedding. They were worried about the family drama at the ceremony. Panic seized me. I'd spent months planning this wedding. Flowers, cake tastings, fighting with venues. I couldn't let Gina ruin this too. Take away another important day by making it all about her dysfunction. Luke said his mother specifically couldn't handle another public spectacle like the engagement party. His dad thought we should wait until things settled down. Until my family situation was more stable. Stable. That word made me want to scream. My family had never been stable. It never would be. If we waited for that, we'd never get married. 2 days later, Gina showed up at my apartment. Unannounced. I looked through the peephole and almost didn't open the door. She looked genuinely broken, in a way I'd never seen. Her hair unwashed, pulled back, sweatpants and an old t-shirt, not her usual flashy, attention-grabbing outfits. I opened the door, and she just walked in, sinking onto my couch like her legs couldn't hold her up. She told me 2 comedy clubs had uninvited her from open mics. The Laugh Factory said they were going in a different direction, she mumbled. The Comedy Store said they were full for the next 6 months. I felt a flicker of guilt. Then I remembered her on the floor at my engagement party, mimicking me collapsing, making heart monitor sound effects. Luke's grandmother clutching her pearls. His business partner's horrified faces. Guilt vanished. Then, she admitted it. The Mr. Randolph story. It was true. Pregnant at 17, blackmailing him, his wife finding out, his suicide. I've carried the guilt for 27 years, she whispered, her voice raw. I still have nightmares about his wife calling me a murderer at the funeral. She said she was young and stupid, didn't understand. She still had the suicide note, hidden under her bed. It mentioned her by name. I sat there shocked. Gina never admitted anything. Never took responsibility. Never showed remorse that wasn't just manipulation. I didn't know if this was real honesty or just another performance. Another way to make herself the victim. Luke's parents invited both of us to dinner at their house to clear the air before the wedding. It felt like a test. Gina promised she'd behave, apologize properly. I didn't trust her for a second. Luke stressed how important this dinner was to his family, that his mother was struggling with supporting our marriage. I agreed to go because I had no choice. The whole drive over, I felt like I was going to throw up. Gina met me there, arriving in her beat-up car, wearing a plain black dress that looked like she was going to a funeral. We walked up to the house together, silent. I could feel her shaking beside me. The dinner started awkward. It got worse. Luke's mother was coldly polite, that rich person way of being perfectly mannered while radiating disdain. His father barely spoke, just cut his food with precise, angry movements. Gina launched into an apology that started okay, but quickly devolved into excuses. Her difficult childhood, being a single mother, no support. Luke's mother cut her off mid-sentence. Many people have hard lives, she said, her voice like ice. They don't exploit their children's trauma for attention and entertainment. The words hung in the air like smoke. Gina's face went red, then white. Luke's father set down his fork. I'd like to know, he said, his voice quiet but razor-sharp, if you plan to use my son's wedding as material, too. Have you already started working on jokes about our family? The question was so brutal, so direct, that for a second, I almost felt defensive of Gina. Then I remembered he was right to ask. Gina's mouth opened and closed. Nothing came out. Her chest rose and fell in quick, shallow movements, like she couldn't breathe. She gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. When she finally spoke, her voice was small, broken. Yes, she choked out. I've been a terrible mother. I know it, even when I was doing it. But I couldn't stop myself. Making people laugh, it was the only time I felt like I mattered at all. Luke's father leaned back in his chair. So, he pressed, are you writing jokes about this dinner right now? About us? The question sat in the middle of the table like a knife. Everyone looked at Gina, waiting. She shook her head. Tears streamed down her face. Real tears, not the dramatic sobs. She promised she wouldn't give a speech. Wouldn't make any jokes about our family. She understood she'd done enough damage. Luke's mother set down her wine glass with a sharp click. That's not enough, she stated. You need to understand, you are on thin ice with our entire family. One more incident, and you will never be welcome around us again. Something weird twisted in my chest. I almost wanted to defend Gina, even though she deserved every word. The words came out before I could stop them. She's still my mother, and she'll be at the wedding. Everyone stared at me, surprised. Luke's mother's eyebrows shot up. His father frowned. They thought I was making a mistake, but I couldn't take the words back. Luke drove me home. Neither of us said much. Just the hum of the engine, a low radio. He pulled into my apartment parking lot, turned off the car, but didn't move. He just stared at the steering wheel. "Do you actually want Gina at the wedding?" he asked softly. "Or are you doing this because you feel like you have to?" I opened my mouth, then closed it. I didn't know. I'd been angry for so long. I hadn't thought about what I actually wanted. He turned to me. "It's okay to uninvite her," he said. "If that's what you need to feel safe on our wedding day, my family will understand. They'll support you." I told him I needed time to think. He nodded, kissed my forehead, and left. I went inside and lay on my couch, staring at the ceiling for hours, replaying the dinner, trying to figure out what I felt underneath all the anger. 2 days passed. I barely left my apartment, just ordered food, my phone in my hand, staring at Gina's contact. I thought about every humiliation, every crossed boundary, every time she'd used my pain. But I also thought about what would happen if she wasn't there. Everyone would ask. The whole day would become about her absence, not about Luke and me starting our life together. I picked up the phone. Before I could change my mind, she answered on the first ring, like she'd been waiting. I told her she could come to the wedding, but there would be strict boundaries. No speech. No jokes about me or our family. If she drank too much, my cousin would escort her out. No discussion. She agreed immediately, without arguing, without excuses. The fact that she didn't fight me actually worried me more than if she had. 3 days later, the wedding planner called. Panic in her voice. Gina had contacted her directly, asking about microphone access during the reception. The technical setup. The best time to use it. Rage surged through my body, so fast my hands shook. She had literally promised me 2 days ago. I left work, drove straight to Gina's apartment. No call. No warning. She opened the door in sweatpants, hair a mess. I pushed past her. "What were you doing calling the wedding planner about a microphone?" I demanded. She put her hands up. "I just wanted to sing a song for you," she insisted. "It's not a speech. It's a musical tribute." I knew she was lying. She was planning a performance. Again, to make everything about her. Standing in her messy living room, comedy notebooks scattered everywhere, I told her. "If you do anything at that wedding to draw attention to yourself, I will never speak to you again." She started crying. "You're being cruel," she wailed. "I just want to celebrate my only daughter's wedding. You're treating me like a criminal." I didn't move, didn't soften my voice. "You're celebrating," I told her, "has always meant humiliating me, and I won't allow it this time." She sank onto her couch, buried her face in her hands. For a second, I almost felt bad. Then I remembered the engagement party, her acting out my suicide attempt for laughs. I left without saying goodbye. Drove to Luke's. Luke listened, then suggested we hire security, specifically for Gina. It sounded ridiculous, but I knew it was necessary. His parents called, and when he explained, they offered to pay. They didn't trust Gina either. I agreed. I realized I needed to protect my wedding day, even if it meant treating my own mother like a threat to my happiness. We spent the rest of the evening looking at security companies. I felt both relieved and deeply, profoundly sad. 3 days before the wedding, I got a social media message from Ted, one of Gina's comedy friends from the fake bachelorette party. He wanted to talk, said it was important. Coffee. I almost ignored it, but something made me curious. He showed up looking guilty, uncomfortable. Stirred his coffee for a full minute before telling me. Gina had been calling all her comedy friends, trying to get them to come to the wedding, to support her. He said it seemed like she was planning something. He felt bad for not speaking up about her behavior before. I thanked him. My stomach dropped. Gina was going to try something, no matter what. I drove straight to Gina's apartment. Again, didn't even wait for her to invite me in. I confronted her about inviting her comedy friends. This time, she broke down completely. Not fake crying. Real, ugly sobbing. Her whole body shook. She admitted she couldn't handle being alone at an event where everyone judged her. She knew she'd ruined our relationship, but she was still my mother, and she was terrified of being completely cut off from my life. I stood there, watching her fall apart. It was unsettling. It was easier to hate her when she was just awful. This vulnerability made everything complicated. She said she didn't know how to be at my wedding without her friends as a buffer. She was scared to face Luke's family alone after everything. Luke and I had an emergency session with our therapist. I admitted my fear, that I was becoming like Gina, someone who hurts people, then justifies it. The therapist helped me see that recognizing this fear meant I was different from Gina. Gina never questioned if her actions were wrong. Luke took my hand. He loved me, trusted me, but he needed to know I wouldn't use his vulnerabilities against him, the way Gina had used mine. I promised him I wouldn't, and I meant it, but I also knew I'd already crossed a line by exposing her secrets. I had to figure out how to be better than that. We left the session with a plan for the wedding, boundaries for Gina, but I still felt uneasy. The night before the wedding, I sat at my kitchen table, a blank piece of paper in front of me. Luke was at his parents' for some family tradition. I picked up the pen, put it down 3 times. Then I started writing. The letter was messy, honest, in a way I couldn't manage face to face. I told her she could come to the wedding. She could bring one person, a comedy friend who would help keep her grounded, not encourage her to perform. I wrote that our relationship was broken. I didn't know if it could be fixed, but I was willing to try, if she could respect real boundaries this time. I explained that I needed space to build my marriage without constantly worrying about being turned into material for her next set. The last paragraph was the hardest. I had to admit that some part of me still wanted a mother, even if Gina could never be the kind I needed. I sealed it, left it on the counter, planning to drop it at her apartment in the morning. I barely slept. Her face at the roast, her secrets exposed, it haunted me. Had I gone too far? Or would she finally understand? The morning of the wedding, I was fixing my makeup when someone knocked. Luke wasn't due for 2 hours. The wedding planner had my schedule down to the minute. I opened the door. Gina stood there, my letter in her hand. Her eyes were red, but not in her usual dramatic way. She looked smaller, deflated. "Can I come in?" she asked. I almost said no, but stepped aside. She sat on my couch, holding the letter. Her hands shook slightly. "I've read it 4 times, she whispered. "I understand. I've spent my whole life using comedy to avoid dealing with real feelings." Her voice cracked. She was going to start actual therapy, she said. Not the kind where she performed. She didn't expect me to forgive her or trust her, but she wanted to try to be better, even if it was too late for us to have a normal mother-daughter relationship. I stood by the door, speechless. This was the first time Gina had ever apologized without excuses, without turning it into a joke. She wiped her eyes. "I'm proud of you for setting boundaries," she said. "I wish someone had taught me how to do that when I was young." I told her she needed to leave so I could finish getting ready. She nodded. At the door, she turned. "I'll be sitting quietly in the 3rd row," she promised. With Lucy, she agreed to be my support person. The ceremony was at a garden venue Luke's parents picked. White chairs, an arch covered in flowers. My stomach was doing flips thinking about Gina out there. Luke's mother had barely spoken to me at the rehearsal dinner. His father kept giving me worried looks, like he expected chaos at any moment. The music started. I walked down the aisle, focusing only on Luke's face. Gina sat in the 3rd row, exactly where she said, wearing a simple blue dress. Not the sequined white monstrosity. Lucy sat beside her, hand on her arm. Gina's face was wet with tears, but she stayed completely still, quiet. The ceremony was beautiful, in a way I hadn't dared hope for. Luke said his vows. I said mine. No interruptions. No performances. At the reception, I watched Gina approach Luke's parents at their table. I couldn't hear, but she was talking without her usual animated gestures, no attempts at humor. Luke's mother's face stayed cold and tight, but she nodded when Gina finished, said something brief. Luke's father shook Gina's hand. Formally. It wasn't a sign of sudden friendship, but it was civil. Something in my chest loosened. Not forgiveness, exactly, but maybe the beginning of being able to breathe without constantly waiting for the next disaster. 6 weeks after the wedding, Gina and I started meeting for coffee. Thursday mornings. Halfway between our apartments. The first few meetings were awkward. Stilted. We were both so careful. I'd made a list of off-limits topics. Things she couldn't ask about, couldn't turn into material. She actually followed the rules. Without complaining. She told me about her therapy sessions. In a real way. No performing, no exaggerating. Just talking about what she was learning about herself. She admitted her therapist had pointed out that she'd used comedy as a weapon to keep people at a distance. If she made them laugh, or shock them first. She didn't have to risk real connection. I listened. I didn't offer forgiveness or reassurance. I just let her talk, let her process, without making it about me. She asked about the wedding, and I told her the parts that felt safe to share. She didn't interrupt. She didn't make jokes. Our relationship will never be normal or easy. The damage runs too deep, too far back. But I'm learning that protecting myself doesn't mean I have to completely destroy her. That I can have boundaries without needing revenge. Luke and I are building our life. In our new apartment. Making plans for the future. Without that constant fear hanging over everything. I still flinch sometimes when my phone rings and I see Gina's name. Still worry she'll slip back. But for now, coffee once a week, with clear rules, feels manageable. And that's enough. I am finally free from waking up every day wondering when I'd be her next punchline. And that freedom? It's worth more than any apology she could ever give me.